Jamie Reed is a whistleblower from the Washington University Transgender Center at St. Louis Children's Hospital. She is speaking out about the troubling things she saw there, why she went from transgender affirming to who she is today, an advocate against child transitions. We also have Vernadette Broyles, who is the president and general counsel of the Child and Parental Rights Campaign. They are sharing Jamie's story today, as well as some other cases that Vernadette is working on. And wow, this is going to blow your mind, and you will be inspired by both of their courage. This episode is brought to you by our friends at Good Ranchers. Go to goodranchers.com. Use code Allie at checkout. That's goodranchers.com, code Allie. Jamie, Vernadette, thanks so much for joining Relatable. First, Jamie, could you tell us who you are and what you do?
Yes. My name is Jamie Reed. I worked in a pediatric transgender center for close to 5 years. I am currently the executive director of the Courage Coalition. We are a group of primarily adult gays and lesbians who are trying to stop the current practices of pediatric gender medicine and support gays and lesbians, and especially those who are maybe gender nonconforming, to grow up with their bodies whole and intact.
And Vernadette, you're her attorney.
I am.
Yes. Can you tell us a little bit about what kind of law you practice and why you're in this?
Sure. I'm the president and general counsel of the Child and Parental Rights Campaign. We are 5 attorneys in different parts of the country, and we bring cases on behalf of parents whose children have been socially transitioned behind the backs of the parents, sometimes even over their objections. And we are also now more and more defending parents whose children are being threatened by Child Protective Services.
And Jamie, let's go all the way back to how I initially heard about you and your story. Your report came out, what you saw at a gender clinic, what was happening with children. So just take us back there to the clinic, what you saw, and why you do the work that you do now.
So I worked in this clinic across the period of time where this really started to explode in our culture.
And what years were?
So I started in 2018 and I left 2023-ish. And what I saw was we were beginning with maybe 4 or 5 kids per month coming in. And when I left, we were seeing close to 60 new kids per month coming in.
Wow.
And the kids that were coming had radically changed. So initially, this was primarily young boys who were very feminine presenting, whose parents were concerned. And it had radically shifted to teenage girls who were significantly mentally ill, who were all identifying as trans and wanting really rapid medical interventions. They wanted testosterone. They were talking about surgeries already. And they were 70 to 80% of the clients now were teenage girls.
How old were they typically?
Oftentimes they would come to us after puberty. So the bulk of our patients were probably 14 to 16, but the clinic did still see kids all the way as young as 3. So, I mean, this was a giant kind of pediatric practice. And when I started in this clinic, I was what we would refer to as a true believer. I really believed that we were intervening early to help children identify their true authentic selves and give them a pathway towards, a healthy, authentic adulthood.
I was going to ask why you started working there in 2018. You just said that you were a true believer, but even so, there are a lot of people who believe that, who don't feel called to get into the actual work of working at a clinic. So what led you there?
So my background is in working in social work roles, but I'm not a social worker. So I've been a caseworker. I currently also now have a master's of science in clinical research. So I've always worked peripherally, kind of social service in medical settings. But I was working with young people who are HIV positive. I did that for a long time. And what I was seeing was that there was this kind of growing cohort of young people who were identifying as trans, and there was some overlap in my patient population. But in my personal life, I was married to someone who was trans, who had medically transitioned, a woman who had transitioned to live as a male. And I also am a lesbian, and I grew up in my own childhood experiencing what some people refer to as gender distress. So I was gender nonconforming. I was a tomboy. I really felt as that true believer that this was part of my community, and these kids were kids that, you know, somehow reflected my experience.
Mm-hmm. And so you kind of felt like this was not only just a job, but almost a calling that you're giving back to this vulnerable community.
Absolutely.
And when you first got there, did it feel fulfilling, like it was what you signed up for?
When I first got there, I felt like it was very haphazard and chaotic. So initially I kind of thought, well, this is just that it's so new. The center had really been only open a year, but there were just elements to it that didn't make a ton of sense.
And this was in Missouri, right?
This was in St. Louis, Missouri, yes. And, you know, one of the things I think we see across the nation is these centers really exploded and have just been popping up in red states and rural areas. Like there's just been an explosion. And so for our hospital to start the center in 2017, there were just crucial elements missing. There were no protocols written. There was no real internal guidelines or mechanisms. This was a center that was started in a really well-known hospital, but was really flying by the seat of its pants and had a lot of structural issues.
Yeah. And you said that when you first started, you were only there for 5 years, so not very long. And yet you were there to see the shift from what you said, young boys. Would you say teenage boys or younger than that?
No, younger.
Young boys who were kind of feminine to teen girls who really wanted testosterone and even double mastectomies and things like that. Going back to the beginning, I want to talk about the difference in parents of these kids too. So going back to the beginning, what were parents saying when they were bringing their young boys in?
Parents at the beginning were a lot more cautious. There was a lot more seeking guidance. Something in the general population shifted in that period too. These were children who primarily had not been socially transitioned by their parents at home. And they were slower, and there was more of an asking the medical establishment, should I socially transition my child? Do you believe that's the right thing to do? Please evaluate my child first. That was more of the parental kind of view. By the time I left, these kids were brought to us having been completely socially transitioned in multiple environments before they ever saw what would be called a gender specialist. These kids had been socially transitioned in school, in their families, in every kind of aspect of their lives. That had already occurred well before they ever often saw any sort of mental health provider.
You said that there was really a lack of protocol when you first started, but what were the typical recommendations for a young boy that was brought in whose parents thought, okay, maybe he's really a girl?
I think that the phrase watchful waiting was a little bit more still in existence at the time. A lot of this is also, there isn't a medical element to this. So the original protocol, as the Dutch and the Netherlands divides this, was that you would start a child on a pubertal blockade when they reach 10 or 2 of puberty.
Yeah.
And so
can you explain what that is?
Yeah. So they Tanner stage puberty into 5 stages. It's not necessarily directly correlational to just blood work. An endocrinologist is actually doing a physical exam of the body. So they're looking for early signs of puberty, breast budding, testicular growth. I mean, this is a body process that takes a long time. The pituitary gland, all of these glands in the brain are basically talking to our secondary sex organs, and they're telling them, turn on, turn off. There's pauses, there's stops. Puberty is a puberty, in my opinion now, is a human right because the body requires these steps.
Yeah.
And the brain requires the pruning and the slowness of how puberty engages. But what we were looking for initially was, is the child in Tanner stage 2 of puberty? And if so, then the question is, are we going to initiate a puberty blockade to block them and then eventually give them cross-sex hormones?
Mm-hmm. And puberty blockers, if it's in a young girl who's in Tanner stage 2, which I think is like when you start seeing the physical outward signs of puberty that you would think like right before a girl starts her period or something
Even a
like
little
that.
bit earlier than that.
Oh, okay.
So Tanner 2 is even earlier than before
that.
menstruation.
And so right before those things, that's when endocrinologists would say, okay, we got to block the testosterone in boys. We got to block the estrogen in girls. And how long would that process typically last?
The part of this medical establishment that really shows me that it is not a tried and true, well-tested paradigm is that there were even debates over that itself. There were some endocrinologists in gender clinics who would allow kids to be puberty blocked for a very long time. And then there were other endocrinologists that were saying, you know, that they would put in an age guideline. So I had an endocrinologist I worked with that would say by a certain age, you had to move on to sex hormones for the body's bone growth and bone development. But again, I've even seen cases now in clinical studies where there are young people who are asking endocrinologists to never be put on sex hormones and asked to remain in a prepubertal status ongoing. And I've even seen ethical papers argue on the other side that this is their right and they should be able to do this.
Ugh.
The damage to the body is just immense. And
the brain.
And the
I
brain.
think a lot of
And the
people
brain.
don't realize that
Right.
puberty is necessary for intellectual maturation, your ability to be able to understand consequences. And there just seems to me, and we can get into this more later, but a nefarious motivation. Like, what kind of people would want to prolong basically eternal adolescence in young people and prevent them from being able to make wise choices and to keep their body in a state of like prepubescent development? That's very disturbing to me.